वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्यं नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरये। नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टकी। So reading today from the 10th canto, new chapter, chapter number 50, chapter entitled Krishna Establishes Dwarka. We'll read text number 1. Sri Sukha Uvacha Asti Praptischa Kamsasya Mahishya Bharatarsabha Mrite Bhartari Dukkharte Iyatu Sma Pitur Grahan. Sri Sukha Uvacha Asti Praptischa Kamsasya Mahishya Bharatarsabha Mrite Bhartari Dukkharte Iyatu Sma Pitur Grahan. Sri Sukha Uvacha Asti Praptischa Kamsasya Mahishya Bharatarsabha Mrite Bhartari Dukkharte Iyatu Sma Pitur Grahan. Asti Mahishya Mrite Bhartari Dukkhate Iyatu Sma Pitur. Sri Sukha Uvacha Asti Praptischa Kamsasya Mahishyo Bharatarsabha Sri Sukha Uvacha Asti Praptischa Kamsasya Mahishyo Bharatarsabha Matajis. Tischa Kamsasya Shobharatarsabha Vrite Bhartari Dukkharte iyatosma pritorgraham. Sri Sukha Uvacha. Sukadev Goswami said, Astihi praptihi cha, astihi praptihi cha, asti and prapti, Kamsasya of Kamsa, Mahishyo, the queens, Bharatar Shaba, O hero of the Bharatas, Parikshit, Mrite, having been killed, Bhartari, their husband, Dukkha, with unhappiness, Arte, distressed, Iyatu, Iyatusma, they went, Pituhu, of their father, Grahan, to the house. Translation by the disciples of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Sukadev Goswami said, when Kamsa was killed, O heroic descendant of Bharata, his two queens, Asti and Prapti, went to their father's house in great distress. Text 2. The sorrowful queens told their father, King Jarasandha of Magadha, all about how they had become widows. Text 3. Hearing this odious news, O king, Jarasandha was filled with sorrow and anger, and he began the greatest possible endeavor to rid the earth of the Yadavas. Text 4. With a force of 23 Akshahuni divisions, he laid siege to the Yadu capital, Mathura, on all sides. Purport. The numbers involved in an Akshahuni division are given in the word meanings. An Akshahuni was a standard fighting force in ancient times. We'll just also read the preface to this chapter. Krishna establishes the city of Dwaraka. This chapter relates how Lord Krishna defeated Jarasandha 17 times in battle and then constructed the city of Dwaraka. After Kamsa was killed, his two queens, Asti and Prapti, went to the home of their father Jarasandha and sorrowfully described to him how Krishna had made them widows. Upon hearing this account, King Jarasandha became angry. He vowed to rid the earth of all the Yadavas, and he gathered an immense army to lay siege to Mathura. When Sri Krishna saw Jarasandha attacking, the Lord considered the reasons for his descent to this world and then decided to destroy Jarasandha's army, which was a burden to the earth. Two effulgent chariots suddenly appeared, equipped with drivers and furnishings, together with all the Lord's personal weapons. Seeing this, Lord Krishna addressed Lord Baladev, My dear brother, Jarasandha is now attacking Mathurapuri, so please mount your chariot and let us go destroy the enemy's army. The two lords took up their weapons, mounted their chariots, and went forth from the city. When Lord Krishna came before his opponent's army, he sounded his conch shell, striking fear into his enemies' hearts. King Jarasandha surrounded Krishna and Balaram with his soldiers, chariots, and so on, and the women of the city, having climbed up to the roofs of the palaces, became extremely unhappy because they could not see the lords. Then Krishna twanged his bow and started to rain down a torrent of arrows upon the enemy soldiers. Soon, Jarasandha's unfathomable army had been annihilated. Then Lord Baladev arrested Jarasandha and was about to bind him up with ropes when Sri Krishna had Baladev release the king. Lord Krishna reasoned that Jarasandha would assemble another army and return again to fight. This would facilitate Krishna's goal of removing the earth's burden. Released, Jarasandha returned to Magadha and vowed to perform austerities with the aim of avenging his defeat. The other kings advised him that his defeat was only the reaction of his karma. Thus informed, King Jarasandha withdrew to his kingdom with a heavy heart. Sri Krishna rejoined the citizens of Mathura, who began rejoicing, singing songs of triumph and arranging victory celebrations. The Lord brought all the weapons, all the warriors' jewelry and ornaments that had been picked up from the battlefield and presented them to Maharaj Ugrasena. Jarasandha attacked the Yadavas in Mathura 17 times, and each time his armies were totally destroyed. Then, as Jarasandha prepared to attack for the 18th time, a warrior named Kalyavan, who had been searching for a worthy opponent, was sent by Narad Muni to fight the Yadavas. With 30 million soldiers, Kalyavan laid siege to the Yadava capital. Lord Krishna looked upon this attack with concern, for he knew that with Jarasandha's arrival imminent, there was a serious danger that the simultaneous attack of these two enemies might endanger the Yadavas. Therefore, the Lord constructed a wonderful city within the sea as a safe haven for the Yadavas. Then he brought them all there by his mystic power. The city was fully populated with members of all four social orders, and within it no one felt the pangs of thirst and hunger. The various demigods headed by Indra each offered as tribute to Lord Krishna the same opulences they had originally obtained from him to establish their positions of authority. Once he saw his subjects safely settled, Lord Sri Krishna took permission from Lord Baladev and went out of Mathura unarmed. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chaksharon Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadanti Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Yuta Padakamalam Sri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sagana Lalitam Sri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhano Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya evacha Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ramo 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 Hare 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 Krishna. So seeking the blessings of all the exalted Vaishnavas here, try and speak a few words about this very wonderful chapter. So we are seeing a lot of action in this part of the Bhagavatam now. So far everything has been very peaceful and very sattvic, but then now we are seeing a lot of action about to take place. And Srila Prabhupada in the first canto, 8th chapter, 36 verse, actually says that personalities like Ravan, Hiranyakashipu, Jarasandha, Shishupal were very exalted personalities. They had full understanding of the Vedic way of life, and that they are not just bodies, and the purpose of this human form of life is not to be attached to their family members and so on. But here we find Jarasandha reacting in a very contradictory manner to how his two daughters come to him, informing him that Kamsa has been killed. Kamsa is his son-in-law. So, he becomes extremely agitated, and he prepares for this great war upon the Yadavas, and he brings a huge army just to defeat this Yadavas. I mean, this 23 Akshahuni soldiers were much more than what was actually assembled on the battle of Kurukshetra. Am I right, bro? Yeah. So the combined armies of the Pandavas and the Kauravas were less than this 23 Akshauhini soldiers that Jarasandha brought along with him. And not just one time, he brought this. Of course, we don't know how many Akshauhini soldiers came in the subsequent 16, 17 times, but we can assume, that was a number of people that he was actually able to accumulate and bring them in order to attack the Yadavas. And we see this particular aspect of how Jarasandha behaved, even with Hiranyakashipu, right? When Hiranyaksha was killed in the battle with Varahadev, right? All these family members of Hiranyaksha were in a utterly desolate situation, where they were mourning, and they could not even be pacified by their own association. There were so many other family members. So Hiranyakashipu had to come, and in fact, the Hiranyakashipu, when he came over there and he started pacifying, actually it appeared as if he was conducting a journey of self-discovery course, right? Right from the basic, what we, when we address, Radha Gopinath Prabhu starts this JOSD course, the first premise is that we are not this body, we are the spirit soul, right? And that is how Hiranyakashipu started talking to these family members of Hiranyaksha. Just like how people come to a particular place when they are thirsty, right? Traveling, wandering people, they come to a particular place just to refresh themselves. And after they get refreshed, then they go about on their own respective journey. And Srila Prabhupada in that purport also gives the analogy of how straws that are floating in this stream, right, in a stream, just come together for some part of time and then separate, right? So this is the understanding that even Hiranyakashipu had, that finally, we are not this body, but we are the spirit soul, and the spirit soul is eternal. And in the next verse, in fact, he tells the family members that, why are you mourning? Finally, at the end of the day, we have to understand that the spirit soul is eternal and the body is temporary. Yeah. But yet the same personality who was on one side preaching to the family members of Hiranyaksha, on the other side, he wanted to become immortal, right? I mean, he had full knowledge that he was not this body, he was the spirit soul, and this body is temporary. But then, this internal aspiration within himself was to become immortal and somehow be eternally a controller, right? So this is how the material nature works in trying to control a living entity. And because the material nature makes a person desirous of acquiring, a huge amount of assets, or a long life, or great beauty, or tremendous power, right? So this is how material nature drives a person in order to achieve all these things, right? So even though a person may be having complete knowledge that, his body is temporary, it's only going to last for a few years, still, he has this desire to somehow or the other control material nature completely. And if you see, a person like Hiranyakashipu was given a body which was, of course, as strong as 10,000 elephants, even more. And not only that is, once he got this benediction from Brahma, once he was sprinkled this water from the Kamandalu of Brahma, his body, actually, it is described, became like steel framed. And actually his height was going all the way up to the clouds. And that was the size of Hiranyakashipu. I mean, extremely fearful personality. And with that much amount of power and that much amount of prestige that he accumulated along with this, he had complete knowledge that he was the absolute controller of everything that was existing in this material world, right? So there was absolutely no one who could ever challenge the supremacy of Hiranyakashipu, and he had complete knowledge, right? So we see in this material world also, we have so many individuals who suddenly, all of a sudden, become such powerful personalities purely on account of their charismatic ability to be able to control people, like just about 50, 60 years back, we had this personality called Hitler, who was, from a material point of view, a puny person. He was not even 6 feet tall. He was just 5 feet, right? And thin, absolutely. If you look at him, it would appear as if he was starving, and he would not even be having sufficient food to eat. I mean, that was his physical stature. Compare that to the physical stature of Hiranyakashipu, right? Completely incomparable, right? But yet, this person, Hitler, what was his charisma and what was the power that he was able to wield over the people? Unbelievable, right? Whatever he said was completely accepted by all those who were below him. And he had such gigantic vision of what his own community or his own tribe or his own country could achieve, right? He wanted that the people of that particular country should be the absolute proprietors and the masters of this whole planet Earth, right? And in fact, he wanted to create a race of people in Germany who were how he would describe as blue-blooded Aryans, right? And that was how he was going about in his laboratories, trying to create such a group of people who were so, in all respects, they were perfect human beings. And according to him, all the others were completely dispensable, right? To the extent that 6 million Jews, right, whom he considered to be not fit to stay on this material world, right, he got them exterminated. So what was the amount of power that he wielded? And it just, when he would be addressing those rallies, millions of people would be attending his rallies. Unbelievable. The amount of power that he wielded over the people, right? Of course, there was even a section of the people who were against him, and they tried. In fact, there was this very famous assassination attempt that was made against him, but he survived that. And as an act of reprisal, as an act of revenge, he got all those people who were extremely close to him exterminated. Right? So this is how these people operate, because when they see that a person gets too close to you, like there was this very famous dictator, I think he was a French dictator, who also had this very similar propensity that when a person became too close to him, he would exterminate him. Right? And once His Holiness Radhanath Swami was mentioning that actually there would be a line of people who would be wanting to be his assistants. Right? Even though they knew that if they became too close to him, it's only a matter of time before which they would be killed. Right? But still there was, because that person wielded so much of power, he was so charismatic and he was so attractive that people could not but be attracted to him. Right? And they were ready to do anything for him. Right? Now, if such a person was to be in Sattva Gun, or he was to be in a state of consciousness that would actually be productive, we can imagine what would be the amount of good work that he would be doing. Like on a similar basis, if you take Maharaj Yudhishthir, right, on the exact opposite side of the situation, right? Maharaj Yudhishthir was also a king, and he had also absolute power, right? But what was his way of controlling the people? Purely by love, by affection, right? By his own personal example, and not by fear, and not by trying to control in a negative way. So we see this throughout the history of mankind. Practically, we have these personalities like Hiranyakashipu, Jarasandha, who come up and want to control people. Right? We had this person called Napoleon Bonaparte. Right? He was also another such personality. Also, and that's actually so funny that the people who wield the maximum amount of power actually in this material world today, they are also Hiranyakashipus in their own sense, but actually they are very puny persons. Even Napoleon Bonaparte was just below 5 feet of height, right? He was not even as tall as me, or not as tall as most of the people over here, right? But he was, again, so charismatic that he would practically lead all the people to destruction, like Hitler. I mean, at some point of time, even Hitler must have realized that what he is doing cannot sustain, right? I mean, he's contending with the powers like America and Britain and all the other countries in Europe, right, were against him, right? Although he had this, demoniac thought that he could control the whole world, but at some point of time, even he must have thought that, this would not be sustainable, right? And then finally, we see that when everything became completely impossible for him, he just committed suicide. But the point is that a megalomaniac like him, not only destroys himself, but he destroys millions and millions of people along with him, right? And we see that same thing that is happening in the corporate world today. I mean, they are the ones who are the actual Hiranyakashipus today of this present generation. People who are able to generate a huge amount of money. The stock markets, where there is a opportunity for every person to participate in the prosperity of a particular company, right? And it is the responsibility of each and every person in the company to somehow or the other see to it that people are attracted to their company, right? And that is how the stock price will go up, right? So you have in the stock market maybe around 500 companies which are supposed to be the cream of the stock market, right? And it is the responsibility of each and every person in a company to see to it that their shares become the most valuable. And people go to such an extent in order to drive themselves and drive the people under them. Like yesterday, there was a banker from one of the most prominent banks here in Bombay who came to meet us. And he was telling me that he controls 2,200 people here in Mumbai. He's in charge of the Mumbai zone of this bank, and he is actually controlling 2,200 people. And I was just talking to him, and I could see the amount of passion that was there inside him, He's a relatively elderly person, must have been in his early 50s or mid 50s. But the amount of passion and the amount of drive that was there in him in order to carry that particular, he wanted to make his zone the number one zone in the whole of the country. I mean, that was his dream. And the way he was talking and, the way he was gesticulating and making all sorts of actions, I mean, you could see that this is how this person is passionate 24/7. And you have to be passionate like that. And he was telling me that's not just him. In his bank, everybody, right up from the managing director to the lowest person in the bank, works for a minimum of 12 hours every day, 6 days a week. And he says, in my case, I don't have any off days. Even Sundays, I carry my work home. I have to work even from my house. Right? There are so many mails that I have to reply to and so many, people that I have to contact, that even Sunday, I am actually sitting in my home, but I'm working on my emails. And he says that there's no option. I have to work 7 days a week just in order to remain in my position, right? Because there are 10 other people who are waiting to come and usurp my position. It's only a matter of time. If I do not perform, then it's only a matter of time that somebody just comes and takes over my seat. And this was his greatest fear. This fear of not being able to perform. The fear of what will happen to me if I get replaced. And this is the fear that drives these people to perform much beyond their abilities. And it is really sad that when you see that a person is, we all understand that he's got no understanding of what is the goal of life and, what is the goal of this human form of life. It is not just to, become the CEO of this organization or the CEO of that organization, but at the time of death, we have to remember Krishna. Antakale chamam eva smaran muktva kalevaram. He doesn't know that. Right? So I told him, Prabhuji, no, I didn't tell him Prabhuji, I told him, sir, the goal of life is not to become the CEO of your bank. The goal of life is to get out of the cycle of birth, old age, disease and death. How will you be treated by your bank once you reach the age of 60 years? What will be your position? He said, I'll be retiring. Then what? Then I told him that even when you enter the same office that you are presently going into, you are the circle head of this bank here in Mumbai, and every day the gatekeeper is saluting you as your car, chauffeur-driven car, enters into the bank. But what will happen to you after the age of 60? I told him, sir, you may not have thought about it, but I can tell you what will happen to you once you cross the age of 60. When your car comes into the gates of this bank, the security man will not even look at you. Take it from me in writing today. I'm giving you in writing that 5 years down the line, when you're going to retire, the security man is not even going to look at you. Really? I never thought of that. It never struck me. And, then it gave me a little bit more opportunity to preach to him, and I told him, this career that we are all trying to chase is all a phantasmagoria. It's all illusory. Because at some point of time, sooner or later, we have to give up all these things. And why we are doing it is because we are so much attached to thinking that we are the controllers, that we are the achievers of whatever has happened in our life. We are not the achievers, it is just our karma. It's just the karma, good karma that we are enjoying today, which is going to run out in a matter of time. And then what's going to happen? And then I just gave him this example of one of my, bosses in the company that I used to work for. Very hardworking, very enterprising person, extremely dynamic. And this person literally grew up from the ranks on this organization. Right? He started as a lowly clerk, and over a period of 35 years, he became the general manager. And along with that position of general manager, he had all the trappings of whatever the company would give him, and in terms of house and car and facilities and entertainment accounts and everything. He had everything. He was already 56 years of age. There was just 4 years for him to retire. Right? And this person, he was right there in the top echelons of the company. He was reporting to the managing director. And in this company that I was working, the managing director would change every 3 years, just like how it happens in the bank. So all of a sudden, a new managing director came into this company. And for some reason, this person and the MD just couldn't vibe with each other. Right? This MD was new, he had come from some different country, and he was posted here as a managing director. And third world country, for them a posting here in India is mainly in order to get a promotion. It's like we have this medical students also, they go from, after they finish their internship, they go to a rural place, and then they have to work there for 2 years, and then after that, then only they are eligible to get a medical seat in a post-graduation course. Right? Or we have the bank officers. Right? They get transferred into a remote location in a bank, and they have to work there for a certain number of years, and then they get a promotion. Right? Because of the austerity that you did, you're given the promotion. And it is intense austerity. Right? To be working in a remote village, and some of the villages are literally one bank villages. There's just one bank, there's a grocery store, there's a post office. That's all. Right? And you can imagine a person from the city who has lived his whole life in the city goes to such a place, right, and has to spend 3 years. Right? So it's really very tough. And then after that, he comes back, and then he gets. So this gentleman, just couldn't vibe with this managing director. So this managing director somehow, overnight, saw to it that this person had no work. He had his position, He was a general manager. He had his car, he had his house, everything was there. But he had no work. Absolutely no work. He had his cabin, he had his secretary, he had his telephones, everything was there. So every day the gentleman would come and punch his card, get into his office and read newspapers. No work. There was nobody reporting to him. There were no subordinates except his secretary. But he was the general manager. And right in front of my eyes, I could see how this person was every day dying a small death. And by the time he retired, that was all that he was waiting for actually, because, he had already put in 35 years in the company. And then he knew that if he was going to retire, the general manager is going to get a pension. So he was waiting for his retirement till the age of 60. So by the time he came to the age of 60, he was almost dead. All sorts of ailments in his body, and he was completely stressed out. And why? Because he had position, but he had no work. And for a person who's been honored, dishonor is worse than death. So I was telling this gentleman, from this bank, that this is what happens to each and every individual. But the problem is that we don't realize it. Because the whole corporate environment is created in such a way to make us think that this is going to be forever. This is called as a fish in a golden cage, right? So we see a fish in a golden, not cage, sorry, fish in a golden bowl, right? So you have the bowl, and then you have the fish, and then it's moving inside eternally, right? So the fish feels that I am protected, I'm taken care of, everything is going on nicely in my life, I'm getting my food every day, right? But then what's the situation? So the same situation, sir, is going to be in your case. So please wake up to the reality that what you are holding today is not going to last forever. I was pretty impressed. I mean, nothing to do with me, it was just entirely the philosophy of Krishna consciousness that I was trying to tell him. And he said, sir, what you told me really makes sense. I would like whatever you have told me to be told to my 2,200 staff. So immediately I called up Shubhilas Prabhu and told him, Prabhuji, would you like to make this presentation? And on Friday, they have arranged for this huge program at Dadar where, Shubhilas Prabhu would be going and making a presentation to this officers of this particular bank and give them the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So it's so practical. And yet, how is it that people are not able to understand these basic things? How is it that people are missing the bus, so to say? They are doing everything in their life, but they are, not understanding what is this goal of this human form of life, right? They're all trying to be Jarasandas, they're all trying to be Hiranyakashipus, they're all trying to be Ravana, right? And of course, sometimes we see that even in our spiritual circles, we have this particular propensity within us to become Hiranyakashipu, Jarasandha, right? We might be practicing devotees, doing everything what, is told to us in terms of, and we might be doing it very well, extremely well, so well that we're actually attracting so many people to come into our association. But unless and until we have the counsel of a person like Vibhishan, because just like out in the material world, when you have people who are respecting you and who are giving you all your status only because of your position, not because you are a person. They are not giving you the respect as a person, but they are giving you the respect on account of your position that you are holding. Similarly, in spiritual circles also we see sometimes that people are given the respect and adoration and, glories. And sometimes it becomes too difficult for us to handle that also, right? So how important it is. So the pages of the Ramayana actually give us this very, very wonderful lesson that Ravan had a huge darbar. And he had not just one or two ministers. He must have had tens and hundreds of ministers, all willing to help him, just like how people were there ready to help Hitler and Mussolini and all these people. Yeah, he had all his select group of people, but they were all yes men. They were all ready to just say yes to whatever Ravan said. If Ravan said that I want to have Sita as my wife, and somehow or the other you people have to help me, yes sir, we are there ready to. Although they might be heart of hearts not really convinced about what Ravan is doing, but because they wanted to maintain their position in their community, right, and their position depends on the position that is held by their superior, so somehow or the other they would be willing to just accept whatever that person said. Although heart of hearts they may not be, because Ravan had not just Sita, I mean he had hundreds of wives, very, very beautiful ladies, Mandodari, and so many of these ladies were not just beautiful, they were chaste, they were perfect wives, always concerned about the well-being of Ravan, right? I mean, what more can a person aspire for in this material world than to have a wife who is always taking care of you, right? Who's always concerned about you, who's always concerned about your well-being. Her whole life and her whole meditation is only how to take care of her husband, how to please him, right? And here was Mandodari who was doing exactly that. But then Ravan, he wanted Sita, because he thought that he could control her. I mean, he could have her. And Vibhishan was the only person in his whole group who was telling him that, my dear brother, what you are doing is wrong. This will be the cause of your destruction. Not just your destruction, you will take the whole Rakshasa race with you. All of us will be dead because of your stupid behavior. So just one person, how he is able to control the destinies of all the people around him, it's unimaginable. Right? Just like Hitler, I mean, he controlled the destiny of each and every German. Right? At the end of the Second World War, Germany was completely obliterated from the face of this world. Right? Japan was finished. Right? Japan supported Germany. Right? They became history. Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the moment those two atom bombs were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, Japan fell with folded, hands and prostrated obeisances at the lotus feet of America. But that was their situation, right? So Vibhishan is here trying to counsel Ravan, but Ravan had absolutely no this. So similarly, all of us, we all need the counsel of somebody who is very, very dear to us, who will be able to monitor us. And particularly when we have this Jarasandha-like tendencies coming in our heart of thinking that, I'm able to control everything, and I have so many people who are working under me, and, I have their unalloyed devotion to me, right? And it happens all the time. That's the nature of this material world, right? If we have a little bit of opulence, we'll have people surrounding us and glorifying us and telling us how wonderful we are. So it's not unusual that this thing comes into the spiritual circles, right? It's there out in the material world, and unfortunately none of us are Paramhamsas, Mahabhagavats. We are all struggling sadhakas, some or the other chanting our 16 rounds and, with great effort, trying to hear the words of Srimad Bhagavatam, trying to, practice Krishna consciousness in our whole. So none of us are actually at that level of a Paramhamsa Mahabhagavat. So we are all struggling devotees. So it is but natural that whatever is there out in the material world will come into our lives, and we have this propensity, particularly if we have some opulence. We are having some oratorial abilities or managerial abilities. Particularly for a manager, this is a very, very difficult situation that he is in. Very dangerous. Because he will always have people who will be looking up to him for guidance and support and, instructions. And he has this tendency to always be guiding them, instructing them. And that also comes into the spiritual consciousness, that I am the controller in whatever way. And this could be the pitfall in our life. as Srila Prabhupada says in the same purport 1.8.36, that why is it that Jarasandha, Hiranyakashipu and Ravan did not have, or did not, although they were seeing Krishna and Ram right in front of them, why did they not acknowledge the presence of Krishna and Ram? Srila Prabhupada says the only reason why they didn't do it, because they were not hearing about the divine qualities of Lord Krishna. Right? Just at one particular aspect of Shravanam, how important it is in our life. Of course, along with so many other things like Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. But Shravanam, how important it is for us to be attentive during Bhagavatam class. Right? Try to attend Bhagavatam class as often as possible. Right? Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. This is the basic thing in our own Krishna consciousness, that we have to hear the message of Srimad Bhagavatam every day. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. And not just we hear Bhagavatam when we speak. Right? It's very nice to hear Bhagavatam when we speak. Right? But then hearing somebody else give Bhagavatam, particularly when that person is junior to us, right, with that much amount of attention as a person who is senior to us, by that we actually make advancement. Right? So that's the glory of what Srila Prabhupada has given us through this morning program that we have in every temple all over the world, where we can dive deep into Srimad Bhagavatam every day. Everybody who gives shares his realization, and it's unique. Right? Everybody has a unique way of delivering the Srimad Bhagavatam. The same verse, right? The same person might have given the Bhagavatam class. Like if you hear Srila Radhanath Swami giving Bhagavatam class 20 years back on a particular verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and 20 years later, the same verse, Maharaj has given it in a completely different way. Right? So, millions and millions of possible permutation and combinations of how the Bhagavatam can be addressed and looked at. Right? But each and every one of them is taking the position of Vyasadeva. And if you are looking at that particular person that way, like when we see Vrindavan Chandra Prabhu or Srinivas Acharya Prabhu sitting on the Vyasasan and giving Bhagavatam class, it's so nice to hear. I mean, they are the next generation. Right? They are the future of ISKCON. Right? We are the past, but they are the future. So when you hear them speaking Bhagavatam, it's so nice to hear, and you're filled with so much of hope that yes, our movement is in safe hands. So that's the glory of Srimad Bhagavatam. Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.